Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Fraad, bringing you the podcast Capitalism Hits Home. Today, I want to talk about children, because people are always saying our children are our future, and there's a whole sentimental view of the children, even though they're getting shot at school all the time. And actually, guns are the biggest cause of death for American children. But nonetheless, there's a lot of sentimentality about children in the United States. And I want to talk about what it may mean for the future of America. Because when they say children are our future, that's not only poetic, it's also true, because the older people will die and the children will hopefully live. For a long, long time, the United States was a nation of promise for the future. Between 1820 and the mid-1970s, just about every generation of white families headed by a male did a little better than their predecessors. There was a dip in the Depression, but the Depression era was also changed by FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and the New Deal. So America really was a land of opportunity, and children really did have a chance. So that for all those years, 150 years, the children of blue-collar earners had a chance to become white-collar earners, and white-collar earners had a chance for their children to be professionals. And that went on for a long time, given a big boost in the United States after World War II, when we were the only economy that was developed and still standing. So between employment and public education and opportunities to advance, people could really improve their lives. Of course, that is not true now. Now each generation does less well than their forebears, no matter what color they are. So let's look at America's children now, because they are our future. Well, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, approximately 1 out of every 6 American children lives in poverty. Now, what does poverty mean? Well, the official poverty line is $27,000 for a family of 4. What does it mean in a child's life? Well, the ages between 0 and 2 are the most crucial years for brain formation. At least 75% of mothers who live in poverty have to work outside the home. And since the average cost of infant daycare is $23,000 a year, a family that makes $27,000 a year, or a single mother making $27,000 a year, is not going to be able to spend $23,000 on quality infant daycare. So poor parents can't afford quality childcare for their children. In addition, homelessness is a huge threat. And the tensions and worries about financial insecurity create an atmosphere of anxiety, both in the womb, where excess cortisol, which is released in tension, affects the fetus, and after a child is born, the tensions in the home create less patience on the part of parents and an environment which is stressful on an infant. In New York City, where I live, 1 in every 8 children is homeless, at least for part of their lives, or part of every year they test. And what happens when children are homeless is they don't have a literal home base. They don't know where they will be. Now with ICE, a lot of children, particularly children of brown people, are terrified that, or their parents are terrified, which makes everything more threatening and worse. But it makes everything in a child's life precarious. There's a man named Herbert Kohl, Kohl, who's a really expert child development professor. He had a study of homeless children. And in the drawings of homeless children, instead of a presentation being a flat line, which is the earth, and on it a tree, and on it little V-shaped, above little V-shaped birds, and a circular sun, everything's floating. The tree, the ground, everything. Because children have no stability. And that's terrifying. Poverty affects every aspect of children's lives. So 1 in 8 children in the United States is deeply affected and negatively affected in their lives. The UN in 2025 made a report on child well-being in developed nations. It's called the Innocenti Reports. The U.S. is at the bottom of the list, even though we're the richest country in the world. Our children are among the poorest economically, the least educated, the least accomplished, and the least happy children in the whole world. It's pretty sad. If children are our future, what does it say about our future? Well, the U.S. is a falling empire. We've lost the last 3 wars we fought, even though we fought them against people with no air force, in Vietnam, in Iraq, and in Afghanistan, and we're busy losing our proxy war in the Ukraine. And at the same time, as people are suffering, billionaires and millionaires just got $1 trillion tax cut, whereas people in the middle and at the bottom have lost social services that saved them a lot of time, money, and gave them a better quality of life. The New Deal rescued United States capitalism, which was in big trouble after the Great Depression and during the Great Depression of 1929 to 1941. Trump and company, as well as almost every regime since then, since FDR died, have been working to diminish or eliminate every aspect of that New Deal that rescued people from poverty. And FDR changed because he was elected on the basic premise of a balanced budget for America. Well, he was able to change. Why? Not just because he was a sweet guy, but in reaction to the Depression, tens of thousands of people were marching in the streets, demanding jobs. At the same time, the socialist and communist parties were very popular. 1 in 4 families had an active communist in it. Their slogan at the time, one of the slogans of the Communist Party was, "Communism is the new Americanism." Farmers in the Midwest organized into what they called the Holiday Association, like give us a holiday for mortgages and financial ruin. And the Iowa militias hung judges that condemned family farms. They went around to auctions where farmers' possessions and land were auctioned off and made sure, through force if necessary, that no one bid more than $1. And when those minute bids were finished, they gave the farmer back his and her land. We don't hear about this in history, but I'm very impressed by that. This is another thing we don't hear about. In the South, the Communist Party organized the very powerful Tenant Farmers Union, which was a racially integrated union that fought for the rights of tenant farmers who were terribly oppressed and immiserated. They fought back, and often, people were killed. These were violent fights. They're covered by a book called Hammer and Hoe by Robin Kelly. And it was the story of how these unions were organized and how they fought. At the same time as this, FDR could see that the CIO, as in AFL-CIO, was organizing whole factories at a level unprecedented. And it was organizing them with the active help of the socialist and communist left. In this awareness of class and class mobilization and activism, FDR could go to his rich compatriots, because FDR was a very wealthy man, and he could say, you've got to pay taxes that are high, because I've got to put out social programs, or else it'll all disappear. They'll take it all. There's a revolutionary fervor in the United States. And so the rich agreed to be taxed at 96.8% of their wealth. That allowed FDR, during a depression, to hire 11 million people, which with our population, it would be hiring 22 million people at decent wages to do all sorts of improvement work across the United States, as well as hiring artists in the workers in the WPA to paint murals and decorate and give plays and make films for the American people. This was an enormously effective strategy. At the same time, during World War II, Russia, which was a communist country at that time, or called itself communist, however you define communist, called itself communist. And it was our primary ally in defeating fascism in World War II. So it was talked up as a great nation and an ally. Even at that time, the Communist Party and Stalin was referred to as Uncle Joe. Wow, that was quite amazing. And he was referred to as Uncle Joe because the Soviet Union lost 30 million people during World War II. They fought fascism in the streets of Russia. They were powerful allies. Therefore, the capitalists were getting nervous, and not for nothing. So when FDR died, because he was enormously popular, they struck back to defund the New Deal and stop the government working for people who need to work for a living, and not for the people who hire them, for the 97% that are workers rather than the 3% that are employers. They found a strategy that really worked for them so that they could smash the left and retain their wealth. And that was going through Joseph McCarthy and the House of Un-American Activities Committee to say that communists and their fellow travelers, leftists and socialists, were actually Russian agents poisoning our country from within and taking away our liberties. They said that anyone who was in the Communist Party was in a party that was seeking to overthrow the United States, even though there really was no evidence. There was no January 6th uprising or anything where they tried to take over the government. But that was a very powerful message. So, for one example, the communists and socialists and the left, who were very instrumental as the organizers of organized labor in the United States, especially in the CEO, were branded as communists and fired. And therefore, what happened to the labor movement is it went from having between 34 and 35% of U.S. workers organized into labor unions after the anti-communist purges, and today there are 9.9% of U.S. workers in unions. So from 34, 35% to 9.9%. And the 9.9 is a little higher. Those are the stats for 2025, because people have been joining unions again. And now the left is beginning to organize again against capitalist assault on people from below, especially an assault on U.S. children, and how people are suffering if they're not rich, as services get to be more and more no longer free, but charged for, and where public education is being corrupted and denied. At this time, the future of America as the land of opportunity, an egalitarian nation where all children have a chance, is obviously threatened. For many years now, each generation does worse than the generation before. The American empire is collapsing. We no longer dominate the world. The BRICS nation, headed by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, with 12 other members and 22 who are applying, has more wealth together than the United States and controls more of the world than the United States. Now, both men and women have to work outside the home because men no longer get a family wage if they're white. Black and brown people never got that. Now, most children break down because most families break down. The majority end in divorce. Most children no longer have stable, ongoing families because the economic conditions of men's family wages have broken down. Women have to work and don't want to come home and do a double shift, so they're not getting married and they're not having children. So the United States no longer has an adequate supply of the care work that brought up another generation. Our children are at the very bottom of the impartial U.S. list. They're not the last, they're the second to the last after more than 30 countries. American children, on all aspects, on their intellectual development, on their scholastic achievement, on their mental health, and on their physical health, are close to the bottom of the developed world. And children are our most vulnerable citizens. That's why they're our poorest and our most deprived citizens. A viable left needs to recognize that and needs to champion programs for universal quality childcare. In New York City, where I live, there is a candidate labeled a communist by his corrupt opposition. But that candidate, Zoran Mamdani, is advocating universal childcare for families, subsidized by taxes on the rich. The left needs to pick that up. And as we continue and as we hopefully rise, as we are doing in New York, children in America may have a future. We have to see to it. It has to be part of our program. We can't neglect children as much as the society at present does. Thank you. Goodbye.